When I went to pick up my wife and mom from the airport, only my mom was there. "Where's Bella?" I asked, and my mom just dragged me towards the parking lot. "She's still in Somali. Santa Catarina. It's a city in Mexico. She wanted to spend some time away from you and her work. But my wife literally sat on the bathroom floor while I pooped because she wanted to spend more time together. Why? Well, Michael, if you must know," she cut me off. "Bella and I found this lovely women's only therapy retreat. She's finally dealing with that trauma from college she never told you about. That night, I grabbed my laptop and searched for a women's retreat until my eyes burned from the blue light. Nothing. And when I texted Bella, her messages were brief, almost formal. 'I'm fine, Michael. Love you.' She'd never talked like that. Never called me Michael. I tore through her things looking for any sign of where she could be, and when I pulled open her wardrobe, my blood went cold. Almost every drawer was full, except for her thong drawer. Over 100 Victoria's Secret thongs completely cleared out. My hands were shaking when I called my mom. "Hey, what's up? Why is my wife's underwear drawer empty, Mom?" she stammered, clearly not expecting me to see that. "Well, Michael, it's a hot country. She didn't want to get a UTI. She took what she needed." "She took 100 pairs of underwear to prevent a UTI?" My voice cracked. "Enough games. Where the F is my wife? She's choosing to extend her stay. She needs this time." I hung up and knew something was very, very wrong. The drive to the police station was 10 minutes, but I made it in 5. The officer was a large man with a pride flag badge, his fingers stained with donut icing. As I explained my wife was missing, the officer yawned. "Sir, does your mother have texts from your wife?" "Yes, but then she's an adult making her own decisions. We can't investigate someone taking a vacation." In a matter of minutes, I found myself knocking on my mom's door, and she came out with a smile. "Hey, I was just about to text you. Bella told me she's willing to call you today, but only if you promise to stay calm." 20 minutes later, my phone rang from an unknown number. Bella's voice filled my ear, but something felt weird. "Hello, Michael," she said, and my stomach dropped. She never called me Michael. It was always Mike or baby or babe. "I'm doing well. You need to give me space. I don't know how long I'll be gone for. Just trust me, because the retreat is helping tremendously." Her laugh came next, that beautiful sound I'd fallen in love with. But it arrived after 2 seconds of silence, like someone had pressed play on a recording of her voice. "Bella, what did we have for dinner the night before you left?" I needed to hear something only she would know. There was this pause, too long, before she said, "I'm focused on healing right now." When I started rapid-firing questions, my mom ripped the phone away so violently that I stumbled backward. "Give me the phone back!" I lunged forward, but she jerked away, and that's when I saw it. A Cartier bracelet on her wrist where her old silver one used to be. My eyes traveled down to her shoes, Louboutins. My mom, who clipped coupons, was now wearing shoes that cost more than our mortgage payment. She practically ran me out of her house, but I didn't go home. Bella's parents lived 40 minutes away, and they'd always been like second parents to me. But when I pulled up to their house, there was a Rolls-Royce in the driveway where their old Hyundai used to be. Her mom answered the door wearing diamonds I'd never seen before. "Michael!" What a surprise! Her smile was too bright, too forced. "Where's Bella? Have you heard from her?" I pushed past her into the house. New furniture, new TV, everything upgraded. Her dad sat in a leather recliner that probably cost more than my car. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your daughter is missing and you're sitting here in luxury?" My voice cracked. "She's not missing," her mom said quietly. "You knew? You knew what happened to her?" Her dad finally looked up, tears in his eyes. "It's not like that. She's being taken care of. She has a new life now." "Where is she?" They exchanged a look. "We can't tell you that. It was part of the agreement." I stumbled out of there, my vision blurring. I drove back to my mom's, parking down the street, and camped out in my car. As soon as she left the next morning, I used the spare key she hid under the rock to sneak in. Something told me to check her closet. The carpet was littered with handbags. Chanel, Hermes, bags with tags still on them worth more than my car. I found receipts for jewelry totaling more than her yearly income. I was in the middle of photographing everything when I heard the garage door open. The front door slammed and I froze. My mom stood in the doorway, her face white. "Where is Bella?" I was practically screaming. Her face crumbled for just a second. "Michael, you don't understand. It was the only way. The only way to what?" "Where is my wife?" She opened her mouth, tears starting to fall. "Michael, please don't be mad." Her face went from white to red, tears running down her cheeks as she kept repeating those same words like they would make any of this okay. I couldn't feel anything except this cold, sharp focus cutting through every other emotion. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. I told her she had one chance to tell me everything right now, or I was going to the FBI, the state police, every authority I could find. That broke her. She collapsed onto the floor right there in her hallway, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. The words came out in gasps. Bella wasn't in Mexico. She never was. My mom had helped arrange for Bella to go somewhere for an opportunity, something that would help everyone financially. I felt my stomach drop. 3 months ago, a woman approached my mom at her salon. The woman was well-dressed, professional, and she had a proposal about exclusive wellness retreats for women. She said they paid referral fees for bringing in the right candidates. The fees were huge, like nothing my mom had ever seen before. The woman showed her bank statements from other mothers who had participated, pages of deposits that seemed impossible. My mom kept talking faster, trying to explain how legitimate it all seemed. The woman said it was completely voluntary, that the women were pampered and well cared for, living in luxury while working as wellness companions for wealthy clients. They chose to extend their stays because the lifestyle was so amazing. My mom convinced herself it was real because she desperately needed money after some bad investments she never told me about. I felt sick listening to this. Every word made it worse. When I demanded to know where Bella actually was, my mom said she didn't know the exact location. Everything was arranged through encrypted messages and the woman who recruited her. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed me a contact labeled Wellness Coordinator. I scrolled through the messages. They were all vague, just confirming dates and payments, nothing specific about locations or what Bella would actually be doing. My hands were shaking too as I pulled out my own phone. I opened the voice recorder app and held it up where my mom could see it. I asked her directly, clearly, how much money she received for sending my wife somewhere unknown. She stared at the phone, then at me, and I watched her face change as she realized how this sounded out loud. $15,000 up front. They promised more later, bonuses for each month Bella stayed. My mom started crying again, saying she thought it was legitimate, that Bella had agreed to everything. She kept insisting Bella signed papers, that it was all official and legal. I cut her off. Bella would never agree to something like this without telling me unless she was pressured or lied to. My mom's face told me she'd had that same thought before, but pushed it away because the money was too good. I couldn't stay there another second. I grabbed the photos I'd taken of the designer bags and receipts and walked out while my mom called after me. My car was still running in her driveway. I got in and started driving. No real destination, just away from there. My whole body was shaking. I pulled up my phone and searched for trafficking hotline. The first result had a number. I called it while trying to keep the car steady on the road. Everything was coming out in a rush, words tumbling over each other as I explained about Bella disappearing, the fake retreat story, my mom's confession, the $15,000, the luxury items showing up at everyone's house. A woman's voice came through calm and steady. She said her name was Mallory Witt and asked me to slow down and start from the beginning. I tried to organize my thoughts. She asked specific questions about the timeline, when Bella left, when the money changed hands, whether Bella had any way to communicate freely. I told her about the weird phone call, how Bella called me Michael instead of Mike, how her laugh sounded recorded. Mallory stayed quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she explained that what I was describing could be labor trafficking, sex trafficking, or coercive control depending on what Bella was told and what was actually happening to her. The luxury goods going to family members were classic signs. It was a scheme that used financial incentives to make sure everyone stayed quiet. The families became invested in keeping the secret because they'd already taken the money and spent it on things they couldn't return. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mallory kept talking, her voice steady and professional. She said the most important thing right now was that I needed to document everything without confronting anyone else yet. If this was an organized operation, they might move Bella or cut off all communication if they felt threatened. I had to think strategically instead of emotionally, even though every part of me wanted to drive to wherever Bella was and break down the door. Mallory's voice cut through my panic and told me to pull over somewhere safe because we needed to make a plan right now. I found a gas station parking lot and put the car in the park while my hands shook on the steering wheel. She explained that confronting anyone else or showing up at random locations could make whoever had Bella move her or cut off all contact completely. I needed to document everything I'd found without letting anyone know what I was doing. She walked me through setting up a folder on my phone where I could keep all the evidence organized and told me to back everything up to a cloud account they couldn't access. My brain felt like it was moving through mud, but I forced myself to focus on her instructions instead of the fear eating at my stomach. Mallory said I needed to file a report with state police instead of going back to local cops because they had way more resources for cases that crossed state lines. She gave me a direct number for a detective unit that handled trafficking and coercion cases. I wrote it down on a napkin from my glove box because my phone was almost dead. She made me promise not to confront my mom or Bella's parents again until law enforcement was involved because I'd already tipped them off that I was looking into things. After we hung up, I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes just staring at the napkin with the phone number on it. I drove home as the sun started going down and my apartment felt wrong and empty without Bella's stuff everywhere. I plugged in my phone and opened my laptop and started going through everything I had. The photos of my mom's designer bags and receipts took up a whole folder. I had screenshots of every weird text message Bella sent that didn't sound like her. I'd recorded my conversation with my mom on my phone when she admitted to the $15,000. I had recordings of Bella's parents talking about the agreement and saying she had a new life now. I opened a document and started writing down everything that happened since I picked up my mom at the airport. The empty thong drawer, the Cartier bracelet, The Rolls Royce in the driveway. My mom's face when I found the handbags. Every detail went into the timeline with dates and times as close as I could remember. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I kept going because Mallory said documentation was the most important thing right now. Around midnight, I had everything organized into folders with labels and backups saved to 3 different places. I barely slept, and when my alarm went off at 7, I grabbed the napkin with the detective number and called before I could overthink it. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up and said this was the State Police Criminal Investigation Unit. I asked for the detective unit that handled trafficking cases and got transferred twice. Finally, a man's voice came on and said his name was Detective Jang. I started explaining about Bella and the fake retreat and the money going to our families. He didn't interrupt me once. He asked questions about the timeline and the financial amounts and whether I had any documentation. I told him about all the evidence I'd organized, and he said the payments to family members combined with controlled communication were serious red flags. He said he wanted to open a case file and asked me to email everything I had to a secure address he gave me. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt different because someone was actually listening and taking this seriously. After I sent the email to Detective Jang, I went back to my laptop and opened our shared cloud storage account. Bella and I used it for tax documents and photos, but I'd never really looked through all the folders. I clicked through random files until I found something called Wellness Intake Form in a folder I didn't recognize. The PDF had a generic logo at the top that looked like it came from a template website. The first page asked normal questions about health history and allergies and medications. But the second page asked about relationship status and whether I had any financial debts or obligations. There were questions about my support system and whether anyone would notice if I was gone for an extended period. The whole thing felt off in a way I couldn't quite explain, but it made my stomach turn. The last section of the form was about confidentiality, and it said participants agreed not to share details about the retreat location or other attendees with anyone outside the program. It was written in that legal language that sounds official and makes you feel like you'd get in trouble for breaking the rules. The whole thing felt designed to cut people off from their normal lives and make them feel like they couldn't tell anyone what was really happening. I saved copies of the form to my evidence folder and sent it to Detective Jang right away. I pulled up our bank accounts on my laptop and started going through transactions more carefully than I ever had before. 2 days before Bella left for her trip, there was a $3,000 cash withdrawal from our savings account. She never mentioned taking out that much money, and we usually talked about anything over a few $100s. I scrolled further and found that she'd paid off her entire credit card balance the same day. We always carried a small balance on that card because the interest rate was low and it helped our credit score. Paying it off completely right before leaving made no sense unless someone told her to do it. I called Mallory back and told her about the cash withdrawal and the credit card payment. She was quiet for a second before she said, "Those were common tactics in coercive situations. Sometimes people running these operations told women they needed to arrive debt-free, or that they'd be earning money that required starting with a clean financial slate. It created this psychological pressure where the person felt like they'd already invested too much to back out. The $3,000 in cash probably went to whoever was running things as some kind of entry fee or deposit. My chest felt tight as I realized Bella had been manipulated into preparing for this without even knowing what she was really signing up for. Mallory said she could connect me with someone who might be able to help more directly with the legal side of things. She gave me the name of an assistant district attorney called Judith Chandler, who worked on cases involving fraud and coercion. Mallory said Judith was really good at tracing financial crimes and could request subpoenas for bank records to follow the money trail. I wrote down Judith's number and called her office right away. The person who answered said Judith was in court but would call me back within a few hours. I left my number and a message saying Mallory from the trafficking hotline had referred me about a case involving possible coercion and fraud. While I waited for Judith to call back, I realized I needed more help than just law enforcement. The legal system moved slow, and I needed someone who could trace where all this money was coming from right now. I searched online for private investigators who specialized in financial crimes and found a guy named Fletcher Gonzalez who had good reviews and experience with fraud cases. I called his office and explained the basic situation about my wife disappearing and luxury items showing up at family members' houses. Fletcher said he could trace purchases back to whoever funded them way faster than waiting for subpoenas to go through the court system. His rate was $200 an hour, which made me wince, but I didn't care about money anymore. I gave him my credit card information and sent him copies of all the receipts and photos I had of the designer items. He said he'd start working on it immediately and would have some preliminary information within 48 hours. Fletcher called me the next afternoon and said he'd started with the boutiques where my mom bought all the designer stuff. He showed them photos of the receipts I'd taken, and they pulled up their security footage from those dates. The manager at the Chanel store let him watch the recordings in her back office, and he saw my mom walk in with a woman who looked to be in her 40s, well-dressed, blonde hair pulled back in a professional style. They spent about 20 minutes looking at handbags, and the blonde woman paid for everything with a corporate credit card, not even looking at the total. Fletcher said the woman walked my mom out to a black SUV with tinted windows in the parking lot, and they drove off together. He got clear shots of the SUV's license plate and the woman's face from 3 different camera angles. The same pattern showed up at the jewelry store and the shoe boutique. Same woman, same black SUV, same corporate card paying for everything while my mom just watched. 2 days later, Fletcher called again with an update that made my stomach drop. He'd traced the corporate credit card to a shell company registered in Delaware called Holistic Wellness Solutions, LLC. When he searched for the company online, he found basically nothing except a super basic website with stock photos of women doing yoga and getting spa treatments. The services section had vague descriptions about wellness retreats and lifestyle consulting, but no actual locations or contact information beyond a generic email address. The company had been registered 3 years ago and had minimal public records. Fletcher said this was a huge red flag because legitimate wellness companies wanted publicity and online presence, but this one seemed designed to stay invisible. I met with Judith at her office downtown and brought all the evidence Fletcher had gathered. She spread the photos and documents across her desk and nodded like she'd seen this exact setup before. She explained that shell companies were super common in these kinds of operations because they created legal distance between the people actually running things and what was happening on the ground. The shell company could rent properties, hire staff, and move money around while the real organizers stayed hidden behind layers of paperwork. Judith said she'd worked cases where these fronts operated for 5 or 6 years before law enforcement finally shut them down because they were so good at looking legitimate on paper. She pulled up similar cases on her computer and showed me how the patterns matched. Fake wellness companies, referral payments to family members, controlled communication with victims. My case wasn't unique, and that somehow made it worse. Judith said she could use Fletcher's evidence to request expedited subpoenas for my mom's bank records and any documentation related to Holistic Wellness Solutions. She warned me the legal process usually took weeks or months, but we were moving faster than normal because of the clear trafficking indicators. Financial coercion, family recruitment, controlled communication, these were all textbook signs that something predatory was happening. She needed me to be patient while the subpoenas went through proper channels because if we messed up the legal process now, the whole case could fall apart later. I told her I understood, but patience felt impossible when Bella was out there somewhere being referred to as a subject in someone's text messages. That night I called Fletcher and asked if he'd help me search my mom's house more carefully while she was at work. I knew we'd already found the receipts and handbags, but something told me there was more hidden somewhere. Fletcher agreed, and we met at her house the next morning after I watched her leave for her shift at the salon. We went through everything slowly and methodically this time. Fletcher checked inside book covers and under furniture while I went through her bedroom. I opened her closet and started checking jacket pockets and shoe boxes. In the back corner behind her winter coats, I found a folder wedged between 2 storage boxes. Inside were printed emails discussing referral compensation and timeline expectations. There was a contract with Holistic Wellness Solutions letterhead about payment structures for successful referrals. And tucked in the back of the folder was a cheap burner phone I'd never seen before. I turned on the burner phone and my hands started shaking as I scrolled through the text messages. They were all about arranging meetings and confirming payments. But then I found messages specifically about Bella. One from 3 weeks ago said the initial integration went smoothly. Another from 2 weeks ago confirmed the first payment had been processed. The most recent one from 4 days ago made me feel sick. It said subject is compliant and adapting well to the program structure. My wife was called a subject like she was part of some experiment, like she wasn't a person with a name and a life and a husband who loved her. I had to put the phone down because my vision was blurring. Fletcher put his hand on my shoulder and told me to breathe. He pulled out his camera and started photographing everything. The folder, every page of the emails and contract, every text message on the burner phone. He took photos of the phone's call log and contact list. He made sure to capture everything from multiple angles with clear lighting. When he was done, he carefully put everything back exactly how we'd found it. Folder in the same spot behind the coats, burner phone tucked in the same position. He explained that we needed to let law enforcement handle the actual seizure of this evidence so it would be admissible in court. If we took it ourselves or disturbed the scene too much, a defense lawyer could argue it was tampered with or planted. I hated leaving it there, but I understood. I called my mom from my car before we even left her neighborhood. She answered cheerfully, asking what was up, and I cut her off immediately. I told her I knew about the burner phone and the folder in her closet. I knew about the contract with Holistic Wellness Solutions and the text messages calling Bella a subject. She went completely silent for about 10 seconds. Then she started crying and saying she could explain. I told her she needed to decide right now whether she was going to cooperate with the investigation or face charges as an accomplice to whatever was happening to Bella. My voice sounded cold and I barely recognized it. She kept crying and saying she never meant for things to go this way. I said Judith Chandler wanted to meet with her and she needed to bring the folder and the burner phone. After a long pause, she agreed. The meeting happened 2 days later at Judith's office. My mom showed up looking like she hadn't slept, her eyes red and puffy. She put the folder and burner phone on Judith's desk without being asked. Judith recorded everything as my mom started talking. She admitted that a woman named Caroline had approached her at the salon about 4 months ago. Caroline said she worked for a company that ran exclusive wellness retreats for women, and they paid referral fees for bringing in the right candidates. My mom said Caroline specifically asked about Bella after seeing photos on my mom's phone. Caroline said Bella would be perfect as a wellness companion for wealthy clients at luxury retreats. The pay was described as amazing, and the work was supposedly just being a lifestyle coach and spa attendant type role. My mom got $15,000 up front with promises of more money as Bella stayed longer in the program. My mom kept insisting she thought it was real hospitality work. She said Caroline showed her brochures and testimonials from other women who'd worked as wellness companions. Caroline explained that the secrecy was necessary because the clients were celebrities and wealthy people who valued their privacy. My mom convinced herself it was a legitimate opportunity because we'd been struggling financially and she wanted to help. Judith listened to everything and took notes. Then she pointed out that the huge payments, the burner phone, the shell company, and the controlled communication should have been obvious warning signs that something was very wrong. Legitimate jobs didn't require that level of secrecy or pay that kind of money for referrals. My mom started crying again and said she realized that now, but by the time she understood what was really happening, Bella was already gone and the money was already spent. Judith leaned forward across her desk and locked eyes with my mom. She explained that there were two paths forward right now. My mom could cooperate fully with the investigation, provide every detail she knew, testify if needed, and potentially avoid jail time with probation and restitution. Or she could refuse to help and Judith would file charges for conspiracy to commit trafficking and fraud, which carried serious prison time. My mom's hands shook as she reached for a tissue. She asked how long she had to decide, and Judith said she needed an answer right now, this minute, because every hour that passed was another hour Bella stayed in that situation. My mom nodded and said she would cooperate, that she would tell them everything. Judith pulled out a formal statement form and started writing down everything my mom said. The whole process took almost 2 hours. My mom described the woman named Caroline in detail, the salon where they met, the exact promises made about the wellness companion position. She provided the phone numbers, email addresses, and bank account information for every payment she received. When Judith asked if my mom had any idea where Bella actually was, my mom shook her head and started crying again. She said Caroline never told her the location, just that it was domestic and that Bella was safe and happy. Fletcher called me the next morning while I was staring at my coffee, unable to drink it. He said he'd been going through my mom's statement all night and found something important. The shell company, Holistic Wellness Solutions, had a pattern of renting short-term properties in several states. They marketed these as immersive wellness experiences for small groups of women. Fletcher found property records and rental agreements that matched the company's registration details. One property stood out because it was currently active, about 2 hours away in a rural area outside the city. The lease was under the same shell company name and had been rented for 6 months straight, which was unusual for a short-term wellness retreat. I told Fletcher I was getting in my car right now to drive there. He said to wait, that we needed to talk to Judith first, but I was already grabbing my keys. Then Mallory called, like she somehow knew what I was planning. She said going to that property alone was the worst thing I could do. If this was an organized operation like we suspected, showing up would alert them that someone was investigating. They could move Bella somewhere else, somewhere we would never find. Or they could hurt her if they thought she had somehow tipped me off. I wanted to scream that I couldn't just sit here knowing Bella might be 2 hours away, but Mallory's voice stayed calm and firm. She said we needed professionals who knew how to handle these situations, who had the resources and training to intervene safely. Judith agreed with Mallory when I called her next. She said local police wouldn't have the jurisdiction or resources for this kind of case, especially if it crossed state lines like Fletcher suspected. Instead, she knew someone at Homeland Security Investigations who specialized in organized fraud and trafficking operations. His name was Zachary Wu, and he had handled cases involving networks that moved women around under false pretenses. Judith called him while I sat in her office, my leg bouncing so hard the chair squeaked. Agent Wu arrived 3 hours later with a file folder and a laptop. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with glasses and a calm way of talking that somehow made me feel like he actually understood the urgency. He reviewed every piece of evidence we had. The photos of luxury items, the receipts, Fletcher's property research, my mom's statement, the weird texts from Bella. He asked questions that showed he was thinking about this as a bigger picture, not just about Bella, but about how many other women might be involved. After 2 hours of review, he said our case had multiple indicators of a larger operation. The shell companies, the family recruitment strategy, the controlled communication, the properties in multiple states. This wasn't just someone taking advantage of Bella. This was a network, probably with multiple people running it, probably with more victims than just my wife. Agent Wu explained that his team would need time to build a solid case before taking action. They had to coordinate with other agencies, get warrants, set up surveillance, and document everything carefully so the prosecution would stick. I asked how long that would take, and he said at least a week, maybe 2. I felt my chest tighten because every day Bella spent there was another day of whatever they were doing to her. But Wu said if they moved too fast and the operation got spooked, everyone involved would scatter, and we might never find Bella or any of the other women. He promised me they would move as quickly as possible while doing it right. I had to trust him because I didn't have any other choice. The next week was the longest of my life. Agent Wu's team set up surveillance on the property Fletcher had found. I wasn't allowed anywhere near it, which made sense but also made me feel useless. Wu called me every couple days with updates. His team observed the property from a distance using long-range cameras and other equipment I didn't fully understand. They saw women coming and going, but always with staff members present. The women never left alone, never went anywhere without someone accompanying them. They dressed in matching athletic wear that looked expensive, like they were at some kind of luxury spa. The property itself was a large house with a pool and landscaped grounds, surrounded by privacy fencing. From the outside, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be, an exclusive wellness retreat. But the controlled movement of the women, the constant supervision, the lack of any independent activity, all of it pointed to something much darker underneath the surface. Agent Wu asked me to come to his office to look at surveillance photos. He spread them across a conference table, dozens of images taken from various angles and distances. He asked if I could identify Bella in any of them. I leaned over the table, studying each photo carefully, my heart pounding. The women all wore similar clothing, their hair pulled back in ponytails or buns. The images were taken from far enough away that facial features weren't clear. I pointed to one woman who had Bella's height and build. The way she moved in the photo, a certain tilt of her head, looked familiar. But I couldn't be certain. The resolution wasn't good enough and I hadn't seen Bella in weeks. I told Wu I thought it might be her, but I couldn't swear to it. He nodded and said that was okay, that they were building the case on evidence beyond just identification. But not knowing for sure if that was my wife in those photos made me feel sick. Judith called with an update about the financial investigation. The subpoenaed bank records for my mom and Bella's parents had come through, and what they revealed was bigger than any of us expected. The payments didn't come from just one source. Multiple shell companies had made deposits into their accounts, all within the same time frame. Fletcher traced those companies and found they were all controlled by the same small group of people through a network of LLCs registered in different states. The operation was sophisticated, designed to hide the money trail and make it hard to connect everything back to the people actually running it. The financial records showed this network had been operating for at least 3 years, with payments going to dozens of different people who had probably referred other women just like my mom had referred Bella. Judith said the scope of the operation meant this was way bigger than just my wife. There could be dozens of victims, maybe more. My phone buzzed with a text from Bella's number. I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. The message said she was doing great and would call me soon, that she missed me and loved me. But the tone was wrong again. Too formal. Too careful. It didn't sound like Bella at all. I typed back asking her what nickname she had for me when we first started dating, something only she would know. The reply came 10 minutes later, completely avoiding my question. It said she was focused on her wellness journey right now and would explain everything when she called. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking. This confirmed what I already knew but didn't want to believe. Someone else was controlling her communication, coaching her responses, making sure she said the right things to keep me from pushing too hard. I called Mallory and told her about the text exchange. She said this was actually useful because it gave us an opportunity to send messages that might help Bella without revealing what we knew. Mallory helped me craft a response that sounded supportive and non-threatening, but gave Bella an opening to signal if she needed help. I texted back saying I loved her and that I was here whenever she was ready to come home, with no pressure or judgment. I said I just wanted her to be safe and happy and that she could tell me anything. Mallory said if Bella had any control over her responses at all, she might find a way to slip in a signal or hint. Or if she was monitored, the message would at least let her know I wasn't angry or abandoning her. Either way, it kept the communication line open without alerting whoever was controlling her phone that we were building a case against them. The next morning, Agent Wu called with news that made my hands shake. His team had been watching the property and noticed increased activity. They tracked deliveries of high-end food, extra bedding, and salon equipment being brought in. When they checked social media and encrypted messaging apps, they found references to a wellness weekend starting in 3 days. Several new women were scheduled to arrive, which meant multiple potential victims would be present at the same time. Agent Wu explained this was exactly the opportunity they needed to intervene with legal justification and maximum impact. The plan was simple but required perfect timing. Code enforcement and health inspectors would show up unannounced to conduct routine inspections of the property. This gave them legal authority to enter and interview anyone present without needing a warrant. If they found evidence of coercion, fraud, or trafficking during those interviews, they could shut down the operation immediately and make arrests. Agent Wu walked me through every detail, and I could tell he'd done this kind of thing before. His voice stayed calm and professional, but I heard the edge of excitement when he talked about finally getting these people. I asked if I could be there, maybe wait in a car nearby or something, and Agent Wu shut that down fast. He said my presence could complicate things legally and might make Bella feel pressured if she saw me before she was ready. I hated it, but I understood. He promised that victim advocates would be on site to make sure the women were treated with respect and care, not like criminals or suspects. That's when Mallory spoke up and said she wanted to volunteer as one of the advocates. She had the training and experience, and she already knew Bella's case. Agent Wu agreed immediately. The 3 days waiting for the operation were worse than the entire 2 weeks before. I barely slept more than a few hours each night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Bella in that property, wondering if she knew help was coming or if she'd given up hope. I couldn't focus on anything at work and eventually just took the days off. My apartment felt too small and too quiet. I kept checking my phone even though I knew no one would call with updates until it was over. I went for runs that left me exhausted but didn't help me sleep. I cleaned the apartment 3 times. I organized our photos and found myself staring at pictures of Bella from before all this happened, back when her smile reached her eyes and she called me baby instead of Michael. I tried to imagine what I'd say to her when we finally talked, but every version sounded wrong. Sorry felt too small. I love you felt too simple. Nothing captured the weight of what she'd been through or what I was feeling. On the morning of the operation, I woke up at 5, even though Agent Wu said they wouldn't move until afternoon. I made coffee and sat by my phone like he'd instructed. The apartment was spotless from my nervous cleaning, so I just sat there watching the clock. Minutes felt like hours. I turned on the TV but couldn't follow what was happening on screen. I tried reading but gave up after staring at the same page for 20 minutes. Around noon, I forced myself to eat something, but the food tasted like nothing and sat heavy in my stomach. I paced from the kitchen to the living room to the bedroom and back, wearing a path in the carpet. Every time my phone buzzed with a spam call or text, I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. Hours crawled by with no word from anyone. I knew Agent Wu said it would take time, that they had to conduct the inspections carefully and interview everyone present, but not knowing what was happening was torture. I kept imagining scenarios, most of them bad. What if Bella wasn't there? What if they'd moved her when they sensed something was wrong? What if she was there but refused to leave? What if the operation went wrong and someone got hurt? I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept coming back. Finally, at 6:30 that evening, my phone rang with Agent Wu's number. I answered before the first ring finished. His voice came through clear, and I could hear relief in it when he said they'd successfully entered the property and found 12 women present. Bella was one of them. She was physically safe, he said, though emotionally shaken by everything happening. They were taking all the women to a secure location with victim advocates who would help them understand they were safe now and could make their own choices about what happened next. I felt my legs go weak and had to sit down on the floor. Bella was safe. After weeks of not knowing, of fearing the worst, she was actually safe. I asked where she was and said I could be there in minutes, but Agent Wu stopped me. He explained that Bella needed time with the advocates first to process what had happened and understand that she had autonomy now. Pushing to see her too quickly, even with the best intentions, could feel like more pressure and control when she'd just escaped a situation built on exactly that. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. Bella had been controlled and manipulated for weeks. The last thing she needed was me showing up and making demands, even if those demands came from love. So I agreed to wait and asked Agent Wu to please make sure she knew I was thinking about her. 3 hours later, Mallory called. Her voice was gentle when she said she'd spent time talking with Bella, who was processing a lot of emotions and confusion about everything that happened. Mallory explained that Bella had confirmed the basic story. My mom had recruited her with promises of a luxury wellness retreat where she'd earn money as a lifestyle consultant for wealthy women. The pitch made it sound like an exclusive opportunity, almost like being a personal concierge or lifestyle coach. Bella thought she'd be helping with spa services, giving advice on fashion and wellness, maybe coordinating events. The money they promised was significant, enough to help with our finances and my mom's situation. Bella had wanted to surprise me with the income and hadn't realized how wrong things were until she was already there. Mallory said Bella was told the secrecy was necessary because the clients were high-profile women who valued their privacy above everything. The controlled communication was supposedly to help her focus on the program without outside distractions. At first, the work seemed legitimate, just greeting clients and helping with wellness activities. But gradually, the expectations shifted. She was asked to spend more time with clients one-on-one, to dress in specific ways, to be more physically affectionate. Each boundary was pushed a little further, always with explanations that made it sound normal and professional. By the time Bella realized what was actually expected, she felt trapped. She'd already crossed lines she wasn't comfortable with, her family had taken money, and everyone kept telling her this was part of the job she'd agreed to. Bella told Mallory she wanted to talk to me but needed a day or two to work with counselors first. She was dealing with shame about what happened and confusion about how she ended up in that situation. Mallory said Bella kept saying she should have known better, should have seen the red flags, should have told me from the start. She was struggling with the fact that she'd initially believed the opportunity was real and that my mom was trying to help us. Mallory assured me this was a normal response for someone who'd been through what Bella experienced, that self-blame was common even when the person was clearly a victim of manipulation. She said the counselors were helping Bella understand that none of this was her fault, that she'd been deliberately deceived by people who knew exactly how to exploit trust and financial pressure. I asked Mallory what she meant by that being normal, and she explained that people who've been through situations like this almost always blame themselves at first. They think they should have seen the warning signs or been smarter about it, even though the whole setup was designed to trick them. Bella kept telling the counselors she felt stupid for believing the opportunity was real, for thinking my mom was actually trying to help us get ahead financially. Mallory said the self-blame was actually a sign that Bella was starting to process what happened, that she was working through all the ways the situation got twisted around on her. The counselors were helping her understand that being deceived by people you trust doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human. I asked Mallory to please tell Bella something for me, that I loved her and didn't blame her for any of this, that I'd wait however long she needed. Mallory said she'd pass that along right away, and that Bella was in a safe house with people watching over her all the time. The facility had counselors available day and night, and Bella could stay there as long as she needed to feel secure and start working through everything. Mallory promised to keep me updated on how Bella was doing, and when she might be ready to talk directly. 2 hours after I hung up with Mallory, my phone rang with Agent Wu's number. He started talking before I could even say hello, his voice carrying this energy like he'd been waiting to share news. They'd arrested 4 people that morning who ran the whole operation, including the woman who'd recruited my mom at the salon. The charges were serious, fraud and money laundering for sure, and they were pushing for promoting prostitution charges too. Agent Wu said the trafficking charges were still being looked at by prosecutors because the legal definition was tricky, but they had enough evidence to put these people away for years either way. He explained that the operation worked by finding women through their family members, people who were struggling with money or debt. The recruiters would approach someone like my mom and pitch this opportunity that sounded completely legitimate, talking about wellness retreats and lifestyle consulting for rich clients who valued their privacy. They made it sound exclusive and professional, showing fake testimonials and doctored bank statements from other families who'd supposedly benefited. Once they got a family member on board, that person would convince the woman to go, using their trust and relationship to make it seem safe. The women were told they'd be helping with spa services, giving advice on fashion and wellness, maybe planning events for wealthy clients. The money promised was always significant, enough to make a real difference for families dealing with financial pressure. When the women arrived at these properties, everything seemed nice at first, exactly like a luxury retreat. But then the expectations started shifting gradually, so slowly that it was hard to pinpoint when things crossed a line. They'd be asked to spend more one-on-one time with clients, to dress in specific ways, to be more physically affectionate during sessions. Each boundary got pushed a little further with explanations that made it sound normal and professional, like this was just part of high-end hospitality work. Agent Wu said the women were kept going along with it through a bunch of different tactics working together. They got charged for their luxury rooms and the designer clothes they were given, building up debt that they were told they'd pay off through their work. But the big payments they'd been promised kept getting delayed or reduced, always with some excuse about client scheduling or payment processing. By the time the women realized what was actually expected of them, they'd already crossed boundaries they felt ashamed about, and that shame made it harder to reach out for help or admit what was happening. Plus, their families had taken money, and everyone kept telling them this was the job they'd agreed to, that they just needed to finish out their commitment. The family pressure was huge because relatives like my mom had received cash and luxury items, and they had a financial stake in the women continuing. Agent Wu's voice got quieter when he explained that part, like he knew how much it would hurt to hear. Later that afternoon, Judith called and walked me through the legal side of everything. She said cases like this existed in this complicated gray area because technically the women had consented to go initially, they'd signed papers and agreed to participate. But that consent was based on lies about what the work actually involved, and once they were there, the consent was maintained through pressure and manipulation rather than free choice. The prosecution was focusing on the fraudulent recruitment, the financial schemes that created debt and dependency, and the way the operation deliberately isolated women from their support systems. Judith explained that proving trafficking charges required showing force, fraud, or coercion, and while the fraud was clear, the coercion was harder to demonstrate legally because the women weren't physically prevented from leaving. But the financial manipulation and family pressure created psychological barriers that were just as effective as locked doors. 3 days crawled by while I waited for news about talking to Bella. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't eat much, just kept my phone with me every second. When Mallory finally called to say she'd arranged a phone call, my hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Mallory warned me that Bella's voice might sound different, that trauma changes people, and I needed to be prepared for that. The call came through on Mallory's phone with Bella on the line, and the second I heard her voice, I knew Mallory was right about it sounding different. Bella's voice came out small and tired, nothing like the confident way she usually talked. She started crying almost immediately and tried to explain what happened, how she ended up staying even when she wanted to leave. The words came out broken up between sobs, and I could hear her struggling to get through it. Bella said she really thought she was helping us financially, that my mom had made it sound like this amazing, legitimate opportunity that would solve our money problems. She'd wanted to surprise me with the income, to show me she could contribute in a big way. By the time she realized what was really expected of her, she felt like she couldn't tell me because she'd already done things she was ashamed of, already crossed lines that made her feel dirty. I told her to stop, that none of this was her fault, that she was lied to and manipulated by people who knew exactly what they were doing. I said the only thing that mattered to me was that she was safe now, that everything else we could figure out together. Bella cried harder and said she wasn't sure how we came back from this, if our marriage could survive what happened. Her voice broke when she said she felt like damaged goods, like I'd never be able to look at her the same way. I had to be honest with her that I didn't know what happened next either, that this was new territory for both of us. But I told her I wanted to support her healing however she needed, that if she needed space and time apart, I'd respect that, and if she wanted to try counseling together eventually, I was willing to do that too. I said the most important thing was her getting better and feeling safe again, and we could figure out the rest as we went. Bella said she needed to stay in the Safe House program for a while longer and work with counselors before she could even think about our future together. She was dealing with serious trauma and needed to figure out who she was outside of this whole experience before she could be in any kind of relationship. I told her I understood and that I'd give her whatever space she needed. The call ended, and I sat there staring at my phone for probably an hour. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into helping with the legal case because it gave me something concrete to focus on besides the empty apartment. I started seeing a therapist twice a week to process everything that had happened. Judith kept me updated on the prosecution, and every update made me angrier at the people who'd done this. The evidence was strong enough that the main organizers were facing serious prison time. They had financial records, testimony from multiple victims, and all the documentation Fletcher had gathered. Judith explained that the prosecutors were building cases for fraud, money laundering, and coercion. My mom's cooperation became a key part of the case. 3 weeks after everything came out, she met with Judith and agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud. She had to return all $15,000 she'd received plus testify against the organizers. The deal got her probation instead of jail time and mandatory counseling. When Judith told me about the plea deal, I had mixed feelings because part of me wanted my mom to face harder consequences, but another part knew her testimony would help convict the people who'd actually run the operation. Bella's parents also had to return their gifts and provide detailed statements for the prosecution. They weren't charged criminally because they'd been less directly involved than my mom, but they had to live with knowing they'd been part of their daughter's exploitation. Her dad called me once during this time and broke down crying on the phone. He kept saying he thought he was helping us financially and didn't understand what was really happening. I couldn't find much sympathy for him. The weeks crawled by and I focused on work and therapy and helping Judith's team however I could. I gave them access to all of Bella's accounts and our shared documents. I walked them through the timeline of when things started seeming off. I provided character references for Bella to show she wasn't someone who'd normally keep secrets or make impulsive decisions. 2 months after the operation, Mallory called and said Bella wanted to meet with me in person. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop that was neutral territory with Bella's counselor present. I got there early and sat at a corner table watching the door. When Bella walked in, my breath caught because she looked so different. She was thinner, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But there was also something new in the way she carried herself, a kind of strength that hadn't been there before. Her counselor sat at a nearby table, giving us privacy, but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Bella sat down across from me, and we just looked at each other for a moment. She started talking, and I listened. We talked for 2 hours about everything that had happened. Bella explained the psychological manipulation in detail, and I had to force myself not to interrupt. She described how the program slowly normalized things that should have been huge red flags. They started with legitimate wellness activities like yoga and meditation. Then they introduced the idea of providing companionship to lonely, wealthy women. Then the companionship expectations started shifting. Each step felt small enough that she convinced herself it was okay. The financial pressure from our families made her feel like she had to continue because my mom and her parents were counting on the money. They'd made it clear how much the payments meant to them. Bella said she felt trapped between disappointing everyone and doing things that made her feel sick. She tried to leave twice, but they reminded her about the debt she owed for the luxury accommodations. They said her family would have to pay back everything if she broke her contract early. She felt like she couldn't tell me because she'd already crossed lines she was ashamed of and thought I'd never forgive her. I reached across the table and took her hand and told her none of it was her fault. She pulled her hand back gently and said she needed me to understand something important. She'd filed for a temporary separation so she could have legal and emotional space to heal. She wasn't saying our marriage was over, but she needed time to rebuild her sense of self and autonomy without feeling like she had to perform or meet anyone's expectations. The separation papers were already filed. I felt like I'd been punched, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told her I understood, and that I'd respect whatever boundaries she needed. We agreed to communicate through her counselor for now. Maybe we could try couples therapy in a few months if she felt ready. She nodded and stood up to leave. I watched her walk out with her counselor and sat there alone with my cold coffee. 4 months after Bella's rescue, the trial for the main organizers finally happened. The courthouse was packed with victims and their families. Bella testified via video link with support from Mallory and her counselor sitting right next to her off camera. I sat in the gallery watching her face on the screen as she described what happened. She spoke clearly and calmly about the recruitment process and the gradual manipulation. She explained how they used family pressure and financial coercion to keep women compliant. She detailed the psychological tactics they used to make women feel like they'd chosen everything freely. Watching her testify was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I was so proud of her courage. The defense lawyers tried to argue that the women had consented and were free to leave any time. The prosecutors destroyed that argument with evidence of the debt traps and family pressure and controlled communication. They showed how the operation systematically targeted vulnerable women through trusted family members. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2 days. All 4 organizers were convicted on multiple counts. The sentencing hearing happened a week later. The judge gave them prison sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. The judge specifically noted the predatory nature of recruiting through family members and the psychological manipulation involved. She said the operation had caused severe trauma to dozens of women and destroyed families. When the sentences were read, I felt this weird mix of satisfaction and emptiness because Bella was still gone, and prison time for these people didn't undo what happened to her. 6 months after the trial ended, I got a text from Bella asking if I wanted to meet for coffee at the place we used to go on Sunday mornings. My hands shook as I typed back yes. She was already sitting at our old table when I arrived, looking different in ways I couldn't quite name. Thinner, maybe, but also more solid somehow, like she was taking up space instead of apologizing for existing. We talked for almost 2 hours about small things at first, her new job at a bookstore where she got to pick her own schedule and nobody knew her story. She mentioned possibly trying couples counseling if I was interested, but she made it clear she wasn't ready to live together yet and needed to keep building her own life first. I told her I understood, and that I'd do whatever she needed. We scheduled our first counseling session for the following week. The counseling office smelled like lavender, and the chairs were too soft, but our therapist didn't let us hide behind polite words. Bella talked about learning to recognize when she was performing for someone else instead of being honest about what she wanted. I talked about how I'd confused protecting her with controlling her, how I'd made decisions thinking I knew what was best without asking. The work was harder than I expected because it meant admitting I'd contributed to an environment where Bella felt like she had to please everyone. We went every week, and sometimes Bella cried, and sometimes I did, and sometimes we just sat there feeling uncomfortable. I learned that loving someone meant supporting their choices, even when those choices didn't include me the way I wanted. Bella started figuring out who she was outside of being someone's wife or daughter or victim. Our future was still uncertain, and we didn't know if we'd end up together or apart. But we were facing it with honesty instead of assumptions, with boundaries instead of obligations, and with genuine care for each other's well-being instead of just going through the motions.